I grew up in a family where it was like science and art. I mean, there was a lot of art. My dad, when I asked him, what's God? What do you think God is? And he said, God is the force that binds hydrogen and oxygen to make water. And so it was not that God was somebody with a wand but it was that intramolecular force of love, of a primordial love that says, I want to come together. H-O, 2 H's and an O, and it happened to be a threesome, but anyway, but 2 H's and O, and I am in this incredible bond, and this is the source of life.
Welcome to the Wild Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Willow Brook. Here we explore the divinity woven into everyday life, the beauty, the grief, the mystery of being alive. Through conversations with wisdom keepers, artists, and seekers, we listen for the truths that crack us open and the stories that bring us home. Today's guest is the incredible artist, poet, performer, and translator of Rumi's poetry, Haleh Liza Gafori. In our conversation, we explore profound themes of love, ecstasy, and grief found in Rumi's work, as well as the transformative relationship between Rumi and his teacher, Shams of Tabriz. Haleh shares her personal journey with translating Rumi's rhythmic Persian poetry and what it has to share with us in these times. Now, some of you, like me, may have a long love affair with the Sufi love poetry of Rumi, and others of you might meet him through this conversation, which is really beautiful to me, because this episode, it really feels extra special to me because of my deep love for Rumi and the embodied feminine way that Haleh brings his wisdom to life. So you're in for a treat. If you're not already familiar with Haleh, she is a translator, performance artist, poet, vocalist, and educator born in New York City of Persian descent. Her acclaimed translations of poetry by the 13th century sage Rumi have been collected in 2 volumes, Gold and Water, which I cannot recommend enough. With ears tuned to the music of American free verse, as well as to the subtleties of the Persian lines, Gafori aims to transmit the whirling movement and leaping progression of thought and imagery in Rumi's poems into contemporary American poetry, while uncovering how urgently and tenderly his poetry dialogues with our times. Sharing her passion for Rumi's poetry and the liberating messages that pulse through them, she performs her cross-media performance piece in which she weaves recitation in English, commentary, and songs featuring Rumi's poetry in Persian, giving audiences glimpses of the astonishing rhythm and wordplay that pervade his original texts. She lectures at universities, and I've been blessed to experience her incredible literary seminars. Haleh, I just have to say how excited I am for this dialogue, for this opportunity to hear you speak. And when I discovered your translations, I was really so moved. And it's really important to me that translations are in integrity to the language that they were written in. And as a Persian woman, bringing them to life with so much beauty and so much heart and music and just the fullness of what Rumi was sharing, I delight in your translations and how they live through you. And I'm really looking forward to this. So thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Willow.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start by asking you, if you would, to share with us one of Rumi's poems that you've translated that's made a lasting impression on your heart, perhaps on the theme of love.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are many. Of course, he speaks about love and brings love in so many different ways. And there are many to choose from. What first came to my mind is Your Laughter Turns the World to Paradise, which is his sort of exploration of laughter. But also he does refer to love in there a couple times, and also to death, actually. Oh, actually, How about this one? Okay, how about I'll read both of them at some point, but let's start with I travel to every city. Let's do this one.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes, I love this one. And please also with the Persian, the Farsi language, anytime you want to
To
bring
pipe.
that in, I love, yes.
Yes, yes. It'll come through. It'll come through in different spots. Yeah. Not on this one. I don't have any of it written here. But, okay. Go
It'll
ahead.
be perfect.
Okay. I traveled to every city. There was none like the city of love. The city of love. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I was missing. Young and callow, I ran from one city to another. All I knew was a searing loneliness. I didn't give love a thought. I walked straight out of its honeyed fields and like a beast grazed on whatever grass I could find. I hungered for onions and leeks, not quail, not honey, not manna. How could I long for what I hadn't tasted? Among souls, I was a soul alone, a restless heart with no wings. A flower has no tongue, yet it tastes the rain. A flower has no throat, yet it drinks the rain. So I tasted and drank the wine of kindness and laughter. Without my knowing, without my doing, it seeped into me. Love called out to my soul. Come in, come close. I've built a house for you. It won't be free of sorrow or trial. Come anyway. No, I said, I won't enter. I resisted time and again. I ripped off my clothes, wailing in defiance. Come or go, love told me. I am here, closer to you than the vein in your neck. Then came the enchantment, toying, sweet words, the magic of the bounding world. Who am I not to be lured? And who am I when love obliterates the I thought I was, leading me, drawing me from one path and leading me on another? I could tell you, but every time I get to this point, the tip of my pen breaks.
So good. Yes. Please share with us any commentary, any of your own like interpretation, like what strikes you the most about this
Well,
poem.
it was a startling poem, I thought, to find, to hear him say, I walked straight out of its fields. I didn't know love. I walked straight out of its fields and like a beast grazed on whatever grass I could find. It's like, really? Rumi? You know, wasn't he always just steeped in love and just a fountain of love? And I think Rumi, Maulana Jalaluddin Muhammad ibn Hussein Balkhi, aka Rumi, right? Maulana Rumi, we call him Maulana. But I think that in one way, in some ways, he speaks these confessional poems also. I mean, perhaps they're totally true. I'm not saying that they aren't true, but also perhaps in a way to say to us, I understand the struggle of human existence, and I understand that we are working with different aspects of self at all times, and that love is a force that is within us and without us, and it is something we uncover and we discover and uncover and discover and uncover and cultivate. And so in these confessional poems, he's kind of, admitting that he also, this great sage that everyone respected so much, had to go through a process to sort of, as he sometimes says, surrender to the force of love, to be love's prey, to let the water of life, love, flow through his veins, to let love's flames burn him up, whatever, metaphor he's using at the time. That this is a process and a voluntary, conscious process, an intentional process to surrender to love, to cultivate love, to uncover love, and that is the mission of the path that he speaks about, and is part of the Sufi path, central to the Sufi path, and it is central in his poetry. So I like these confessional poems because they're so tender. And, that part when he says, you know, uh, Among souls, I was a soul alone, a restless heart, no wings, and then shifts into a flower has no tongue, yet it tastes the rain. A flower has no throat, yet it drinks the rain. So I tasted and drank the wine of kindness and laughter. That always brings me to almost to tears because it's so sweet and tender. And, without my knowing, without my doing, it seeped into me. And to go to those places where we trust or where we open to what might be unfamiliar. When he says, when I let love obliterate the I thought I was. In another poem, this one in gold, he says, wreck the house you call self. He says, be a stranger to yourself, wreck the house you call self. And this is at the beginning of the path. This is when we're just sort of first saying, oh my goodness, I've been swimming as a fish in a certain environment, in certain mental patterns, in a certain way of being that maybe, I've learned or I've inherited or the culture is sort of pushing me towards. And I didn't know that there are other things to taste. There are other ways of being that are more relaxed, more expansive, more compassionate, more generous. And the beginning of the path is the sense of there are, right? And so it's nice to hear that he had to go through that too.
Oh, yeah. Totally. And I love how you speak about him as a confessional sage, really offering himself and in all of those moments that we can relate to. And I mean, I'm so in love with Rumi's poetry. I have been for many, many years. And I think what speaks most deeply to me is the ecstasy that is in his poems, and not despite, but in the midst also of the grief and the longing and the not leaving anything out, And I love that Water, your book Water, you call it the moody cousin, those watery depths of what he brings, the intensity, the longing, the relationship to death, and how it's all so connected. And yeah, thank you for that.
Of course. Yeah. And what you said, in terms of, even in the face, I think you said in the face of difficult challenges, right? That he calls upon also the ecstatic and calls upon love and calls upon radical generosity too in the face of crisis. I mean, that's also a very amazing thing and can be sometimes perhaps a bit of a tall order. But again, it's an invitation that we move towards, and we recognize that we go into the ecstatic in this selflessness. When he says selflessness is sky, selflessness is sky. The bird of the heart flies nowhere but there, and he has that poem in gold. Should I read this one?
Yeah, please.
Where he says, where I won't read I'll hop around in it, but just let me see where it is. Here it is. This one, where he says, since we are sort of facing all kinds of crises now in our world, this is a very helpful poem. But he says, whatever the ways of the world, what fruits do you bring? Right? This is the manageable question. Whatever the ways of the world, we know that there's, oh God, such a tragic state our world is in so many ways. What fruits do you bring? It's kind of generous in a way. I mean, it's asking us to stand up and feel our responsibility in this world. What are we offering? What are we bringing to the table? But he's also not telling us, go out there and save the world. I mean, we must try. I mean, I like to keep that sense of, I want to save, not the world, but sort of, I want to make this earth inhabitable for the 7 generations before us, and let them make it for the 7 generations before them. To have that desire, I think, is very important, and at the same time to say, well, I'm not going to solve everything, but what fruits can I bring, and how can I sort of contribute to this cause of love and reverence to our dear Mother Earth?
Yes.
Got to be one of the best planets in the cosmos, I think. I'm all for her. I love this planet so much.
It's a spectacular, beautiful place. Lots of that water of life.
God,
so much beauty, so much amazingness, and so much pain.
And so much suffering and pain. Yeah. Difficult being human, difficult. Life on Earth is not easy. And probably especially for us, our species, because we're
Yeah.
such complicated creatures with our cerebral cortices, you know?
We're so complicated.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
have so many wants besides basic needs, you know?
Mhm.
I always say we don't have fur. So we come
Mm.
out with basic needs, you know, and then we have all these also on top of that desires that we feel are absolutely necessary, and it just gets so complicated. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
so much of the Sufi path is about dealing with the thing called nafs ammare, the imperious ego, you know. So anyway, we'll
Yeah.
keep circling around to these things, I guess. But
Yeah.
here's the poem, right? Whatever the ways
Please.
of the world, what fruits do you bring? Say famine strikes, no bread or bowl of rice in the land. Royal in rank, royal heart, where is your hand? Where is your measuring cup and storehouse of grain? Say earth and sky fall to idolatry, all of us on our knees worshipping figurines. Where is the idol, noble and clever enough to break that spell? Say scorpions, thorns, and snakes overrun the world. Even so, you are brimming with joy. Where is your garden? Take us to the flowers. There, right? Miser's rule. Say miser's rule. Generosity fades from memory. Still, your eyes see. Your heart is full. What wage will you pay? What clothes will you offer the stripped and bare? Say sun and moon go down in hell's flames. What light will you shine? What fire will you light before we can't see, before we can't hear? Say there's no mouth to utter love's secrets. Where are the silent translations surging from your heart? Dear friend, dear friend, imagine you're a jeweler. You have more wealth than you can count. What else would you do but rain down pearls? Come, let's leave this all aside. We are drunk on a lofty ale. He knows these are lofty visions, right, of this kind of radical. We are drunk on a lofty ale. Good, we should be. Let's put this all aside. We are drunk on a lofty ale, and it's getting late. Where, my friend, is your tavern? Take
Mm.
us there, right?
Yeah. Thank you for reading that one. And it's, also for some cultural context for anyone else who isn't immediately familiar with Rumi. As you said, Maulana, our master, as he's referred to
Mhm.
very lovingly, he was a 13th century sage who was raised in a family of Islamic theologians in the Persian Empire and spent a lot of his young life fleeing the Mongol invasions and, ended up in Turkey, where he died, where he taught, where he was, a very respected speaker, and then met his vagabond teacher Shams, and that's a whole other piece we can get into. But, I return often in the points of our times where everything that feels so horrific feels, huge, and everything that's going on in Gaza, what's, in Iran, in our world today, in Sudan, in so many places of this world where we are also so exposed to it in such an immediate way with our technology. And I
Yes.
wonder, Haleh, if you could speak a little bit to what wisdom Rumi has from, 800 years ago, to living in times of great violence, of war, of horror, and what he brings from his alchemical process, his devotion to love, his tall, lofty orders, what he has to share with us now, because you're so good at that. Grief is not a mistake. It is a sacred response to the profound love that we carry. Whether your loss is fresh or long held, our grief community Holy Lament, with my co-creator Mirabai Star, offers a space of companionship, creativity, and soul-deep transformation. Through the alchemy of reflective writing, poetry, shared witnessing, and sacred song, we invite you to explore the healing landscape of grief in a circle of loving presence. This is a spiritual container for those ready to turn toward loss and reclaim it as something sacred. Learn more at wildheart.space/holy lament.
Yeah, I thank you. And that's a very good question. And I appreciate that question because, we are living in challenging times. And what does Rumi say to us? Well, in one poem, he says, look at me, right? What is this? He says, um, at this feast, he says, jokingly, but also he's entertaining a different way of thinking. I'm the lowest of the low. I'm so far gone in ecstasy. I don't know, up from down. And again, he's throwing out the notion of hierarchy, and he's saying, this is enough of this kind of thinking. When his students were like, what do you mean we should be taught by Salahuddin? Salahuddin is not an educated elite. And Maulana Rumi said, he has a heart of gold. And he's a generous being, and he's a compassionate being, and he understands. And you need to listen to Salahuddin. This was after Shams was gone, and he said, you need to listen to Shams, right? And, this sense that it is the heart. Let the heart speak. Let the heart speak and listen to the wisdom of the heart. That's truth to me, and Rumi's, vision of love as a central, primordial force that is within us, divine love that is within us, and that is our mission to uncover it. And that's the quest of life. People are sometimes like, what is the meaning of life? Well, what if the meaning of life is to go into the experimental laboratory of being more loving, of practicing love? Go ahead, face the ego, face narcissism, face it all, and say, what happens if I experiment with love in this moment instead? He says, Andar goshayesh Adam an ohteha goshud. At the doorway to emptiness, all knots come loose. Untie the knots is the invitation. Yes, Earth is challenging, but let's not manufacture more suffering. Let us not allow our minds to manufacture more suffering, and let us not project that suffering onto the world.
Absolutely.
I'm like screaming. I'm sorry if I'm.
Oh no, I'm into it. You got the passion.
Yeah.
You're here.
Yeah. Okay.
We're alive, and this is part of it. And
it's exhausting, and we're at the point of exhaustion, and enough of this sense of, it's naive to say that we can have peace. What do you mean it's naive? Yeah. It's idiotic to think that war is necessary and war is some kind of resolution. I'd rather be naive than idiotic, and actually, it's not naive. It's intelligent, and it's the evolution of humanity. That's it. It's heart intelligence. It's not naive.
Yeah. And I believe so wholeheartedly in the cultivation of love. And Rumi, to me, is such a contagious example of that. That cultivation of the kind of love that does get you drunk, as he says, which is a very elaborate metaphor, right? Andak, Javi Masan, Mirisad, like this way of being so intoxicated by the love that you can't help but be overwhelmed by it. And that becomes contagious. And, in these times, it's so tempting for me to be like, so in the grief, because it's necessary to inhabit that, to be real, to be truthful about it. And also, who am I to talk about love in these times? It's like, who are we to not? Like, we have to. It is our greatest power. And to me, it's the greatest source of energy to work towards something that we actually want, the world that we want to live in. And
absolutely.
Yes, to be overtaken by it, which I'm like, Rumi is like the best teacher in that way. I'm like, bring me into that ecstasy and let us build the world from that place, Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And underneath that grief, and underneath the passion, and underneath the outrage, which is understandable, is love. And to say this is love. Like when I go out, I was in Minnewaska State Park, which is one of my favorite parks on the planet. I haven't seen like tons of parks on the planet, but I've seen a good number. And Minnewaska is so beautiful. And I was there with my friend, Julia, who's a wonderful human. And, we said so many thanks to the earth. And we were swimming in these delicious waters, and we said thank you. And we did like little ceremonies that, we wanted to just be in vocal reverence, and this is a way of expressing love, and, and just like just thanking Earth, like constantly remembering, how lucky we are. And knowing that there are challenges and not everyone is able right now to unfortunately go into Minnewaska and swim in its waters. And I wish everyone to be able to enjoy this earth and nature, and what we can do is start by trying, to just express our love and let that become normalized in that culture instead of the other stuff, instead of greed, which has been normalized for so long and upheld and even idolized. That's not. Let's let love be the force that is
Yeah.
really what we quest for and what we raise our children in, and we are swimming in instead of fear. It's a,
Yes, and that's what we're here to do.
yeah.
That's what we are doing here in this podcast in our small and big ways in the world. Oh, well, Haleh, I want to know a little bit more. You share about how Rumi was a part of your early life, those recitations of
Yeah.
the Masnavi that was passed down in your family from Iran. And I would love to hear kind of the spiritual infusion of Rumi and how you were raised with his voice and his poems, and then how you came to be inspired to start translating them into English. I would
Well,
love to hear about that.
yeah, and it's funny because you were just talking about the drunken ecstasy. The first Rumi line that I ever heard, the first line by Maulana Rumi I ever heard, my father was reciting, "Yek khane purze mastan mastan no residan, divanegan bandi zanjirha daridan." And this, in that line there, in that very wonderful couplet, well, first of all, you can hear the rhythm. یک خانه پر ز مستان مستان نو رسیدند دیوانگان بندی زنجیرها دریدند. And that line maston, I mean that word maston, the masked, the ones who are masked, and masked means intoxicated on love, on the divine, on the love for the divine, on the love for this divine existence, intoxicated on existence in a state of wonder and awe. The masked are the love drunk, right? And so in this poem, the house overflows with drunkards drunk on love. More come knocking. Crazed but still bound, they tore off their chains. You can't quiet this ruckus. The heavens are beating the drums in celebration. Hearts that serve, ecstatic souls, hearts that serve the heart, broke free from their prisons and launched like birds. They shattered the jugs. They don't need them. Their bodies are barrels. Their blood is wine. Oh, God, what wine did they drink? Oh God, what love did they taste? What love did they taste? And so this sense of, the maston are the ones who are breaking through chains of whatever the mind forged manacles that Blake calls them, the mind forged manacles, and that Rumi talks about over and over in his poems. I broke through my chains. Once again, I broke through the chains. And these are the chains in the mind, right? But that also sometimes can be imposed upon the world. And so this is the quest, and the heavens beat the drums in celebration because human liberation is a cause for celebration. And that's that truth, And anyway, that was the first poem. So I heard, and, I didn't know what it meant as a child, and I didn't know what my dad was feeling about it at the time, but he loved it, and I'm sure he would have talked about it with me if I had asked him back then, but I wasn't yet ready for those questions. I was a kid, thinking, about just being American, and, it was like, what's this Persian stuff? I don't know. But, I did hear the rhythm and the rhyme of the poetry and how the poem sort of galloped through the living room. And I loved that kind of rhythm, and I loved it. And my dad would recite Langston Hughes, and he would recite F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he would recite Flannery O'Connor. I mean, so the word prose and poetry were in the air in little bits and pieces. And And then, when I was around 20, I started to read translations of Rumi. And there were some poems that touched me. And there was one particular line that I found very important, was about moving out of the tangles of fear thinking. And I thought, oh, you can do that. Can you do that? And I just needed someone to tell me, do it. And so it took some time. It took decades, but it took me some time. It took me some time to shed a very intense anxiety disorder that I had as a child and adolescent. It didn't persist into my late teens too much. Once I got to college, a big part of it shed, but it was just a matter of shedding and shedding and shedding. And I was in a state of a sort of a frozen state, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I was in a little bit of a freeze state for various reasons from childhood. And so, I had to melt. And so, there were different things that were helping me with that process. But one of the things were some of Rumi's lines. And then I started to investigate that possibility of moving out of the tangles of fear thinking, and what does that mean, and how is that possible, and what happens. And then eventually I was singing Rumi's lyrics in Persian and trying to making songs out of them. And then eventually I left that for a while. I did sort of a deep dive in South American medicine songs, and I was learning all these different songs from of Peruvian culture, and also the Umbanda tradition, Afro-Brazilian. And these were just things I was just enjoying learning. And I actually felt a lot of uplift from them, from these songs, a lot of sort of good vibes inside of these songs. And, the the spirits of Oshun and Yemaya, Yemanja, as they say in Brazil, but Yemaya in the Yoruban, and Oshun. Um, Now I have to say, I have always been sort of somewhat of a skeptic, and I don't like to talk about the esoteric too much. And I don't,
Mm.
I feel like it's almost a private relationship with the unfathomable, and it sounds kind of funny when we talk about it, and I don't want to impose my views on someone else. I feel like it's very personal, the spiritual life and the spiritual relationship and the relationship with the invisible, unfathomable, great spirit that is pulsing through different entities and through all of us, is something that we come to in our own personal way. And that's a good thing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about it. It can be helpful and also wonderful. But I've always felt kind of funny in that area. Like, it sounds funny. And I grew up in a family where it was like science and art. I mean, there was a lot of art and literature, but it was like science, art, statistics, and that stuff is sort of weird. Leave that aside. Although at the same time, my dad was like, when I asked him, what's God? What do you think God is? And he said, God is the force that binds hydrogen and oxygen to make water, and so it was not that God was somebody with a wand but it was that intramolecular force of love, of a primordial love that says, I want to come together. Two H's and an O, and it happened to be a threesome. But anyway, but two H's and O, and I am in this incredible bond, and this is the source of life. This is where life begins, is through these bonds. This harmonious bonding that brings miraculous life into being. It's incredible, and I agree with that. That is one of the ways of defining the divine. There's so many ways, and so I like people to have their definitions, and none of us necessarily need to impose that on anybody, convince anybody of anything. I don't need to convince anybody of anything, but I have a personal relationship. Sometimes I think it sounds funny, and so I don't always like to talk about it. But let me go back to Oshun and Yemaya. I like them. I love them. And I love there's water, and I love the symbology. I love the notion that Oshun is the goddess of the fresh waters, and that she's the queen of clarity, and that through her is rushing this beautiful force of water, transparent, cleansing, clarifying, let it be. The waterfalls, the lakes, the sweet water, the fresh water rushing through this being, and that we all have this. When Rumi says, open your eyes to the four streams flowing through you, water, milk, honey, wine. Water, the clarifying, cleansing. Milk, the nourishing, and we all have it. Honey, the sweetening. Wine, the intoxicating. And we have all of these within us. And one could say, oh, we also have venom, or we also have other things. And that's true. But let's say open our eyes to these four and focus on those four and on bringing those forth and cultivating those, So anyway, that's this notion of Oshun as this goddess of the waters. Then there's Anahita, who is the Persian goddess of the fresh waters, and she's like a cousin of Ocean. They're like the same being in different cultures. She's also a goddess of the fresh waters, rivers, and she's a pre-Islamic goddess. Hello, I like the notion of the divine feminine. Now, I can, hear like part of my brain going, that sounds funny, huh? It doesn't sound very scientific, but I don't care. You know what I mean? I know what I'm saying here. It feels in my body, yeah, big yes, to let the divine feminine flow through us. And you know what? It flows through all of us, not just women, also through men, also through non-binary. It's all here for us and what we cultivate and allow. So that, but, and then Yamaya is the ocean, and then the notion of the shoreless, boundless sea of love, and also the ocean, just the ocean itself in a literal level, as this incredible place of tremendous abundance, and how much food has been in the ocean and the rivers that the earth gives us. So generous, this earth. And then humans go and pollute it. That's our problem. And we have to deal with that problem. We have to figure out how to be more in line with the divine. But, so these things matter to me. So I spent a certain time being there with this. And then I heard the call. Well, it wasn't actually. It was, yes, well, it was an internal call. Go back to your roots now. And then one day in 2016, there was a translation on my desk by somebody else, and I read it. And I thought, is that what he said? And I looked at the original, and I was like, eh. And so I decided to, translate it, because I wasn't content with the translation. And so I decided to translate it. And it was such a joy to be inside the poem, such a joy to work with it, that I said, I'm going to try another. And then I thought, well, I'm going to try another. And also it was this fun practice of my mother and I sitting and reading the poems aloud. It was a good way to be in communion with her, reading the poems aloud, and she has impeccable Persian. So I learned from her, and she also liked, to teach me certain things about the language, which was beautiful, and I encourage, like, I have a friend who's Vietnamese, and she's been thinking about working with Thich Nhat Hanh, and and she sees her mother, and I say, do it. It's such a wonderful practice to go to your roots and see perhaps how an ancestor, a mother, a grandmother, or somebody can be involved in that process of introducing you more deeply to your own roots. So anyway, that's not accessible to everyone, but if it's accessible to you, it might be something you might want to investigate. But the point is that did happen, and then I continued on my way. And it was a labor of absolute love and an exciting curiosity to see, like, what's the next poem going to say? What can I find next? And to be startled, and to translate the poems that somehow startled me and go for those, like these fruits I would pluck off a tree and devour. It was like, I want the next poem. And then
Yes.
inside language, and be playing inside of language, and without having to write the whole poem, because the poem was there. So it wasn't I didn't have to do the generative process of writing the poem, because the poem's there. I just had to do this other next level of, which is the transmission into another language, which is a way of being inside language in a very collaborative way, because I was collaborating with Rumi, and I like collaboration. And so that was super fun and great experience. And so that's how but I wasn't first thinking, a book. It was just one poem, then another poem, then another poem. And then, now there's a manuscript, So.
Wow. Such a beautiful process. Yeah, and everything you said there too around the ineffable quality of the divine, how in a way it feels like impossible to put it into words or to talk about it. And what's interesting for me is that yet poetry to me
Yes.
is this it's the transmission, and it's the words, and it's so far beyond the words.
Yes.
Like, I was sitting with your books last night in preparation for this conversation, and I get these waves of wow, transmission, of ecstasy, of depth. It's just the arrow into my heart just from reading the words, which it can be about the words, but it's so much more than the words.
Agreed.
And what a beautiful, amazing mysterious paradox that I am so in love with.
Yes, I love that, how you said that. And I think that's so true. The sort of paradox of what poetry is, that it's words, but it takes us beyond words, through words, takes us beyond words. You're right.
I'm here to let you know that getting on our Wild Heart email list is the best way to stay in the loop about upcoming events and everything we're up to here at Wild Heart. Receive our musings on divinity and daily life, feminine wisdom, embodied writing, and grief as a spiritual path at wildheart.space. And, I've been so curious what your process is of translating, and I feel like I've gotten a taste of that already. And I wonder, because in that dance of collaboration that you're doing with Rumi, making those choices and being a poet yourself, I think that's the other reason your poems hit me. The translations is I can feel the life of the poem. It's not just the words, there's the life and the language so alive. And I wonder, what is your approach in that process of transmission? Like, what is it that you hope to transmit to the people who read? Because it works. Whatever it is working on me.
Yeah,
I'm just like, ooh, is that ecstatic? I imagine it would be ecstatic, but I'm just so curious.
It is ecstatic. Well, it's so wonderful to be in his poetry. It's so wonderful. I mean, a lot of, when I was working on Gold, it was during COVID, and I was so lucky to swim in this Rumi's sea of poetry. It is ecstatic. It frees, it relaxes the being. I mean, I know during this session, I've been talking with a lot of intensity about the world and about the patriarchy. And I want to say simultaneously, there is a feeling in me that over time has become more and more relaxed, more and more calm, more and more compassionate. And that is partly because I have been eating this poetry. Partly because of that, and so I'm so grateful to him, for being able to speak as a sage, as a human confessing his own struggles, as a funny comedic friend, as a dazzling poet, bringing forth these images that startle, and so that the images become almost visual mantras in a way where you can repeat this and you can feel it when he says, let 7 grudges and spite weigh on the heart, let 7 streams of water wash them away, make room for love's wine, be its cup, be its cup, be its cup, and you can sort of repeat this to yourself and feel this. And I think the repetition, just like, for instance, the 99 names of God, which each have a meaning, a beautiful meaning. And then the idea is, what does it mean to activate that Latif, that Halim, that Rahman, or in the being? What is the sort of process of doing that? What does it entail? I think this is a great process, and I'm very, very grateful for him. And so what I want to transmit, I chose poems that speak to me, and I chose poems that speak to our times, because here I am, a woman in I started in 2016, moving through these years, getting one poem after another, and interested in this poem or interested in that poem. And usually because either there's an image that I love that startles me or that delights me, or there's a thought that I think is really useful. And, it's just, yeah.
It's so beautiful. Oh, and I am very curious to hear from you, Haleh, more about Shams of Tabriz. So as I alluded to earlier, of course, the very renowned Islamic theologian Rumi was preaching and, very respected, very praised, and along came Shams and kind of lit fire to the life that he knew, and they lit each other's fire in many ways. And, I've mostly been immersed in Rumi's translation of the Masnavi, this, in some way his poetic reflections of the Quran. And this, both of your books are collections from Divani Shams. And I am like, also I heard you speaking about going to Konya. I went on a pilgrimage there myself, and, walking to Rumi's Maqam, his resting place where his tomb is, and then just a couple minutes away, sitting at the tomb of Shams of Tabriz and feeling the ecstasy in the air there. And I would love, because you are so in that relationship in some ways, translating it, like, what is the inside scoop on their connection? How do you feel Rumi's Rumi's relationship to Shams in this poetry? Like, I'm so curious because you have your hands deep in it.
Mhm.
What do you have to share there?
Well, I will say when I was in Konya at Maulana's tomb, Rumi's tomb, there was a moment I was standing there and I was feeling Rumi, Shams, and my dad. I felt them all. My dad had passed in 22, and I was in may he rest in soaring peace. And I was in Turkey. I believe it was 2023, so it was just the following year. And I was feeling all of them, and I felt laughter. And I didn't actually read the laughter poem, but maybe I will after this. But I was feeling their joy, and I, was just happy to be there. And I was just there. I felt I was in communion with them. It's a very intense place, his tomb. And then I thought, okay, now I'm going to go. And I sort of turned to go. And then I felt like I was yanked back. And it was like I couldn't go. I just stood there more. And then I stood there more, and I kind of felt that I was hearing sort of some instructions about certain things that I was working on. And then I was ready to leave. And then again, I was pulled back. And this happened 3 times. And then after 3 times, I said, I felt like now it was like time to go. And I couldn't turn my back on it. I couldn't turn my back on the tomb. So I stepped backwards, and it's pretty crowded in there, but I was careful to try to not bump into anybody. I didn't turn my back on it. And then I went out the door, which is, if you're going backwards, it's to the right. And then kind of just stayed like this. And that was that. And it was a very, a powerful sort of magnetizing moment. And Shams and Rumi, I feel, they were deep, 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 deep friends first and foremost, and, Maulana was longing to walk the talk in a deeper way. He was longing for something more at the apex of his career as a preacher. He was longing for something more. And Shams at the same time was finally longing for a kind of disciple or a friend, really, someone but someone he could bestow his wisdom upon. And he had not wanted to be a teacher, and he had refused many times when people would ask him to be their teacher. But then at around the age of 66, he was feeling a bit lonely, and he thought, and he knew about Maulana Rumi because Rumi was famous. And he thought, maybe this is the one, I will go there. And, they had met, I believe, earlier than that in Damascus. That's some people say that, and I think that's probably true. And Rumi had said, teach me. And he said, no. But now it was time. And Shams wanted a student that was already at the top of the mountain, just about ready to fly, and all he would have to do was like give him a little push and he would fly. And he says in one poem, you have your wings and feathers, you don't need mine. And he says, and he challenges him in water. There's that dialogue between them, where he says, he's pushing him and challenging him. And he did that. He pushed and challenged him to sort of let go of the shackles, let go of his sense of reputation, and speak from his own voice. Well, and more so than that, allow himself to be a conduit. and to express himself, because he knew that Maulana Rumi had been such a devoted reader, devoted student, devoted gatherer of knowledge, and had all of these stories and Islamic texts, in his bones and in his blood, and many, many, many things that he was able to tell all these stories with such ease. And he said, now I want to hear your voice. What is your voice? And he challenged him. And that's, on page 77 of Water, but part of the dialogue, he says, you can't hide, Shams said. You're the idol to your worshippers. You're the candle lighting their way. And Rumi says, I'm no idol. I'm no candle. I said, I'm the scattering of smoke. And he was trying to tell him, no, I'm not interested anymore in being an idol. I want to be in that state of fana. Fana is the state of dissolution of self and the divine. And sometimes it's thought of as in a divine sea, and sometimes as the scattering of smoke. And then he says, but you're a preacher, a sheikh, a torchbearer, a leader. And Rumi says, no, I'm your servant. And he says, my servant, well, you have your own wings and feathers. You don't need mine to fly. And so there was this, this dialogue of like helping him kind of feel, and then in the process of sama, of whirling and listening deeply to music, he became the poet and was spouting spontaneously poetry. And of course, this was a practice that not everyone agreed with, but Shams was like, this is the portal to the divine. Sama is a sacred practice, and let's do it. And so he brought him into this. So this love, when you have a teacher / guide who opens your world like that, right? This love is something that I don't think most people in the world get to feel. But this is a love that is colossal, because this is the person who was the one that gave me the key to open the shackles on my own mind and set me free. And also, could there have been romantic love between them? Why not? Some of the poems have an erotic flavor to them, and so many of our great poets through history have had and great writers and great artists have had homosexual relations. So why wouldn't that be a possibility? Of course it's a possibility. And some people say, no, that's blasphemous. But that's homophobic to say that. I mean, it's not blasphemous to say that. It's totally within the realm of possibility. And I think they loved each other deeply. And I wouldn't be surprised at all, if they had a sensual relationship. And again, I hear the voices that of people I know, that are like, don't say that. And I'm like, you know what? Come on, come on. So let's leave it as a possible. I just know whatever it was life transforming for both of them. And it was deep and profound. And they went into places that only can be reached when the heart is completely unmasked and the mind is unmasked and all masks are dropped, and they could go into intimate, truthful conversation. And they can also, experience the mystical wonders together of the grand mystery. They went together. And it's so beautiful. And, God is in the room. They say when two people are in the room speaking honestly together, that's God is in the room. So they saw, Rumi felt that Shams was his portal to God. I mean, he says, friend, cave, yar mara, qar mara, ishq jigar khar mara, yar tui, qar tui, khaj negah dar mara, dan tui, dam tui, bad tui, jam tui, pukht tui, kham tui, kham be magzar mara, hujre khurshid tui, khane nahi tui, roze ummid tui, rah de yar mara. I mean, on and on and on this poem goes, and many of the poems in praise to Shams, saying, oh, my friend, you are my cave. Why does he say cave? Because cave was where Muhammad heard the verses from Gabriel. So when he says, you are my cave, friend, that means you are my portal to the divine. So that's a big statement.
It's huge. Oh. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I feel, those tastes of their love through the poems in your books, the translations, just the deep transmission. And I think so often about the ways that Shams really disrupted business as usual, sending Rumi into the tavern to get some wine, which is like so, unheard of in Islamic culture. And, and then we have this metaphor of being drunk on love, right? But that also, his challenging with the practice of Sama, which if people are not familiar with the lineage of Maulana, the Mevlevi order of Sufis, the dervishes that erupted out of this welcoming of the music, the divinity of music from Shams that, again, was very controversial, was not necessarily respected or seen as divine from the traditional, environment that Rumi was raised in. Oh, and that mystical practice of music is so ecstatic, and wow, to do the turn, to do the dervish practice is, oh, I mean, I could go on and on about that, but I would love to finish with a question from you, Haleh, to really understand a little bit about your own mystical relationship to music, the way you weave music into your recitations, the music of the poem, itself as you recite it, and if you would be willing to sing a verse for us as we wrap up.
Sure, yeah. A lot of times he was composing the poems, especially the poems that appear in Divan Shams of Tabriz, composing them to the beat of a drum. Not always, but a lot of the time. So he was a master of rhythm. So there's a music sort of embedded in his poems, and a lot of Iranian great master vocalists compose songs with his lyrics. This is not uncommon at all. And so there's an array of singers, the great Humayun Shajarian and his father, who passed away recently, but Humayun passing on, what a miraculous voice, and Shahram Nazari and Parisa, all of these people have sung Maulana Rumi and are tremendously singers, trained in Persian classical music, and also, I mentioned Humayun as Shajarian's son, also Hafez Nazari, who's a composer, mostly, but all of these people are creating music with these because they call you to. They've got a rhythm embedded, and they're calling you, sing me. And so sometimes I walk around the forest with a poem and a melody comes, and why don't I do this will tie everything together.
Perfect.
I didn't read the laughter poem, but I invite people to get gold and find the laughter poem. It's a good one. But I will do this one. This is the opening poem in Water. And at the end of the poem, he actually addresses Venus. And this poem is an invitation to the Venus within us all, to show your face. This is the love within us, the capital L love, the love within us. Show your face in this world. Speak out loud, because we need you. And I will, maybe I'll recite it first, and then I'll sing part of it in Persian. Okay. So
I would love that.
He says, you show your face. Again, this is to the face of love. You show your face, your flushed face, and stones spin with joy. Once again, for the sake of awestruck lovers, lift the veil from your face, speak out loud, so learning and logic lose their way, so men of reason shatter their culture of unreasonable reason, so water reflecting you becomes the jewel, so fire retires from war. When I see your beauty, when I see your virtue, I don't need those 2 or 3 hanging lanterns. I don't need the moon. The old rusty heavens are no mirror for your face. You breathe in, you exhale, and from the tied up, tight-fisted world, a new world is born. Venus, you long for the eyes of Mars to gaze upon you? Oh, come on. Play your harp. Sing your song.
چون نمایی آن رخ گل رنگ را از طرب در چرخاری سنگ را چون نمایی آن رخ گل رنگ را چرخاری سنگ را چون نمایی آن رخ گل رنگ را از طرف در چرخاری سنگ را چون نمایی آن رخ گل رنگ را از طرف در چرخاری سنگ را بار دیگر سر برون کن از حجاب برای عاشقان تنگ را تا که آب از عکس تو گوهر شود تا که آتش واهلد مرجنگ را در دمیدی آفریدی باز تو شکل دیگر این جهان تنگ را در دمیدی و آفریدی باز تو شکل دیگر این جهان تنگ را در دمیدی آفریدی باز تو شکل دیگر این جهان تنگ را چون نمایی آن رخ گل رنگ را از طرف در چرخاری سنگ را چون نمایی آن رخ گل رنگ را از طرف در چرخاری سنگ را
Oh, thank you so much, Haleh.
You're
Wow.
welcome.
So full of love and beauty, and thank you for sharing everything you did with us. I want to encourage everyone to pick up Gold and Water and read that laughter poem and all of the rest. And you can stay in touch with Haleh with her website, her social media. You've got events. Anything else you would love to share with our community who wants to stay connected?
Yeah, I'll be sharing pieces of things more on YouTube at Haleh Liza and on Instagram at Haleh Liza. And I'm out there, I do events in different places. So the events are listed, halehliza.com on my website, and come and hear some of the wonderful musicians I play with too, and come and bathe in this poetry as much as you can. It's good for you. And I'll do my best. I'll do my best to transmit it as well as I can as a human.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to your father, to
Yes.
Rumi, to
And my
Shams,
mother and my dear
and your mother.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of the beings that are here in all of the ways they are. And thank you. Thank you so much, Haleh.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Willow. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for tuning in to the Wild Heart podcast. Make sure to check out the show notes for links to connect with Haleh and to order her amazing books, Gold and Water, and also to see what we're up to here at wildheart.space. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review to help others find this wisdom. A special thanks to my beloved fiance, Manny Fasihi, for editing and supporting this podcast. We are so grateful to have you here as a part of our community, and we look forward to welcoming you to a future event or a future podcast. Much love, everyone.